bullying is caused by shortcomings in the organization. When we don't know what you should do, what I should do, how should we do it, when are we supposed to be done, to what level of quality, if we have role conflicts, if we have a workplace culture which allows a lot of very, let us put it, uncivilized behavior, to put it mildly.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gosberg. Hello, Shipping Podcast lovers. Welcome back. Welcome to the 109th episode of the Shipping Podcast, where you will be listening to Cecilia Österman, the CEO and researcher at her own company, Comfortably Safe. Cecilia is a senior lecturer at Kalmar Maritime Academy at the Linnaeus University in Sweden. We recorded this on April the 2nd, which was actually the second time we recorded it, because I made a fool out of myself and destroyed some recordings. So we had to do it again. It really didn't matter to me, as I can listen to Cecilia sharing her knowledge for hours. I'm proud to present yet another woman in the maritime industry who is making a difference through her work. So without further ado, this is the 50th female guest in the Shipping Podcast. Her name is Cecilia Österman. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. My name is Cecilia Österman. Normally, I introduce myself as I have a PhD in common sense, and I am a salesperson in obvious matters. And I would say that means that I work with stuff like that should be obvious for everybody, that it's wise to have arrange a good work environment and good working conditions.
And what is your background? How did you come in contact with shipping?
It's not the obvious background. I have a background as a marine engineer. So I started working on ships as an engine apprentice in 1990. So it's almost 30 years ago now. Worked on board Swedish merchant ships for several years, and then I started working as a safety engineer at the shipyard before going into research into work environment, human factors.
And your family background is within the marine, I understand?
Yeah. I have not the merchant navy, but I have both my father and my grandfather. They were in the Swedish Royal Navy. So I was actually, as a young kid, I was allowed to get on board the big destroyers. Big in a Swedish sort of way, but the destroyers as a kid on these family days, and I thought it was really interesting being out there on the ships and the big guns and everything. So I've always been interested in ships and the sea, but then I guess I felt that the Navy wasn't really for me, because I mean, I must say I don't think it's that important what color your socks are. So I was more focusing on the actual work. So when I saw the opportunity that you could actually join the merchant navy instead.
So what kind of ships did you sail on?
Mostly ro-ro and ro-ro ships mostly. Some passenger ships, of course. I'd say you haven't really been in shipping in Sweden if you haven't done your few weeks at least on a passenger ferry. Also a little bit on a tanker, but I'd say most of the years I've been on various ro-ro vessels.
It's a very male environment.
It is. Yeah, it's a very male-dominated industry. But I must say that when you're on board, most of the times, both me and my colleagues sort of forget the gender after a while. It's mostly in the beginning.
So you were a chief engineer, and then you decided to become a researcher.
Yeah, it was a few steps in between. But yeah, to narrow it down, basically, because I felt that, how long can you do this? How long should you be on board? And I wanted to learn more. And also, I mean, the work on board has developed largely, I would say, I mean, forever since the day of the Phoenicians. But I think we've seen a rapid development of automation, information, communication technology over the years. And also that meant that we are more efficient on board and we are fewer people doing, new kind of work. But still, after a while, I felt that I was doing basically the same kind of work, but with fewer people. And I wanted to learn more. So that's why I went into research. I've always been very curious.
Yeah, I think that helps when you are a researcher. Mm. Yeah. So what was your area of research? Where did you start?
Well, formally, I have a PhD in shipping and marine technology. And when you hear that, it sounds like I would be an expert in steel plates and rudders and propellers and stuff. But in practice, my PhD was about maritime human factors and the value of working proactively with ergonomics and human factors, to see it as an investment rather than a cost.
In the engine room, or
no, not specifically the engine room, but more on a I'd say an industry level or company level. That if you work proactively with this, you can see the benefits. Not only in terms of increased health, which is perhaps the most obvious part, of course, it's good for the individual, but you can also see benefits at the company level and also industry level when you have less surprises, less problems with the engines or in the production, to put it generally. Also, people are doing the right job in the right way. No off-hires. You have a limited personnel turnover because people like it there. They like it with each other and the work they do, and they feel trust for the company. So you don't have to train as many people, and you can also. It's also a matter of recruiting the right talent also.
And nowadays you are a researcher and a lecturer?
So I am a lecturer at the Linnaeus University. It's in Kalmar, at the southeast of Sweden, at the Kalmar Maritime Academy, as it was formerly known. And there I have several various research projects in different areas, but they're all related to the human element.
So if we start from the beginning, so what is steering our work environment on board a ship?
To start with, I'd say you can't really look at it. I mean, the work environment management work can't drive sidecar. I mean, it must be integrated. It's not something that you can put aside and look in a microscope. It's actually must be very much integrated in the rest of the operations. So in all decisions you make, you have also to think, I mean, how can this affect the work that is performed or the work as it should be performed? Will it affect the people working there? So that we make sure that people are giving the best prerequisites for actually making a good job. I mean, most of us, we want to do a good job. I mean, I think there's few of us out there who wake up in the morning and, today I'm going to go to my job and do a really shitty work. I mean, that might happen, but I don't think it's very common. Most of us, we want to perform. We want to excel. We want to learn new things, and we want to do it together with nice people and nice managers. So all we need is someone to just give us the right conditions to make it possible.
So, I mean, it's a cultural thing. So every company has got their own culture, which is very important, both on shore and on the ship. And that comes from the management.
Yes, yeah, it does. It's definitely a top management commitment from the company ashore, and also, of course, the management on board. I mean, the captain, the master, and the senior officers. That I mean, it all trickles down this culture. And then, of course, I mean, it's up to the authorities to also make sure that the baseline is regulated. And in shipping today, we have several systems. We have a regulatory framework at an international level, regional, and also national level, of course, where we have the IMO have several regulatory frameworks, of course. So we have the 4 pillars, as we say, with the SOLAS Convention for Safety of Life at Sea, the ISM Code, International Safety Management, that makes sure that things doesn't happen randomly. We must have a system to make sure that we do the right things in the right time, and that we allocate the resources to doing the right stuff. And of course, the regulation for standard and training certification, and the Maritime Labour Convention, the 4th pillar in this. For Swedish shipping, I would say that the MLC perhaps didn't bring that much new, because we have had higher standards than that for many years, actually. But it's interesting because this is perhaps one of the most globalized industries we have. So it's still so polarized, and the differences are so large between the different working conditions in various areas. I mean, we actually work in an industry where we still need regulation to make sure that seafarers are allowed to have clear drinking water and food. For us living in Sweden, that is not a question that we ask during an interview. If we go apply for a job, will you provide drinking water? I mean, we would probably be upset if there's not a good coffee machine, not in a coffee machine, but a good coffee machine. Yeah? So we have different expectations.
So where does that responsibility lay? I mean, who is there to check up that everything is in order?
The easy answer would be the employer. The employer, the shipping company, the operator, I mean, they are responsible to make sure that the ship is not only seaworthy, which is, I would say, the baseline, but it demands more. I mean, it must still be good working and also social conditions on board, because on many ships, it's not only a working environment, it's a social environment where I eat, sleep, rest, recreate, spend hopefully some times with nice colleagues. The authorities also have an important role in this, of course, as long as they don't ask the right questions about this. If they are only concerned with the seaworthiness and the steel and the hull and the propellers and the engines, and don't ask questions about working conditions, I mean, you won't have the same driving force, I would say.
And it's the flag state, it's the flag that the vessel is flying that is deciding who is going to check up on this.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So we have the flag state that is responsible for the working conditions on their flags, so to speak. And they also, the port states also have the authority to go on board and make inspections also on foreign flagged ships. So the Swedish inspector here can go on board in the port of Gothenburg and make inspections also on ships with other flags to make sure that they fulfill at least the lowest standards in the Maritime Labour Convention.
Can we talk a little bit about your latest research area? I understand that after the Me Too movement last year, there was also a Me Too movement at sea. And we could see a lot of women who started to talk about the working conditions. Mm-hmm. And that is something that you are now going to look into.
I think when the Me Too movement, I think there were a few women who were actually surprised, unfortunately. And Sweden had a very strong Me Too movement, if you compare to other countries. But maybe that is because we are one of the most gender equal countries in the world, according to this gender gap index that is published every year by World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. We are one of the 5 top most gender inclusive countries.
But you couldn't really believe that when you heard the stories from the female seafarers.
So when you saw the stories that were shared in these closed Facebook groups, here we had movements for several professional groups, from actors and people in the academia and doctors and lawyers. And of course, I would say, not surprisingly, also for women who has worked or are still working within the maritime domain in Sweden. We call it the lätta ankar, or anchors away in Swedish. That was the hashtag. And we are a small country, and in the Swedish Seamen's Registry, we're about 10,000 people working at sea. Then, of course, the cluster is much bigger. But for such a small country and such a small industry, and still there were almost 1,200 women in this closed Facebook group. and they were sharing stories that you just could not believe. And many of the stories, they were shared for the first time because women haven't felt safe enough to share them before, or afraid of not being believed, and also in many cases, I would say, hasn't even seen perhaps a reason to share them because it's so normalized.
Yeah, when I meet you and our friends who are sailing or has been sailing, you share stories and I feel like, what? And for you, it's normal. For instance, you never go to bed without putting a chair to the door when you go to sleep.
Yeah. Or lock the door, depends. I mean, and also the other day we were talking about our little routines when we were washing our underwear in the laundry machine on board, and other stuff, or routines that we just do without even really thinking about it and not even discussing it with other women. We develop coping strategies, I would almost call it.
Yeah, you are sitting next to the washing machine.
Yeah.
Until it's finished.
Yeah, making sure that you're there first when the laundry is ready, so that nobody else can get to your underwear.
Well, I can't even imagine. I mean, I live in a flat and no one enters my flat without my permission. And I can do my washing whenever I want. But when you live where you work, it's a different story, especially if you are the only woman on board. And we also heard stories about young students who went out to practice what they've learned at school and how they were greeted. And that was terrible. It was, I don't know what to do about it, more than support the women who are now sharing their stories.
Yes, support. And I must say it was much needed. I think the Me Too movement really ended, I hope, or at least assisted in ending this culture of silence. Because for so long time we've been silent about this. We don't speak about it, and as I said, many times we haven't even felt the need to speak about it because it's no normalized. So this is the way we do it here. It's not much to talk about. But with this, the behavior is not accepted anymore. And I agree. I mean, when you hear these stories that have been in the industry for many years, but not working on board, I mean, there's things that you just would not accept in an office environment. And when I reflect over some of the things I've seen and heard, and think, could this be possible? For instance, when I worked at the Swedish Work Environment Authority, not likely. And whose responsibility is it? I mean, during the Me Too movement, we heard a lot of these, especially employers, managers, who are standing there saying, but why haven't the women reported this? Why didn't you tell you? And I'd say, well, but that's because that's how it works. And it is not the individual responsibility to go and report things. It is the responsibility of the employer to make sure that this doesn't happen.
I think we could also see when we listen to the different stories that there was a trend, if you can call it that, with young females who were sort of not as high in the hierarchy as the men who bullied them or harassed them. Yeah,
and I'd say that is you could certainly see that in the stories that were shared in the Me Too group, but that is also what's been seen in scientific literature, seen and reported in scientific literature over the years when looking into research about sexual harassment and bullying. That independent on if it doesn't matter if it's bullying or harassment because of gender. I mean, in all kinds of situations, it's very common to have this power balance where it is someone who is a stronger person. And this can be a formal power, that it's the manager or boss, or it can be a very strong informal person, which have a lot to say, a lot of leverage on the working place. So you often see a power distance. And it's also more common to see these kinds of poor working environments and bullying in strictly hierarchical and male-dominant environments also. So it's not.
And here we are. I mean,
yeah. Basically, we have a very traditional environment. It's very hierarchical because in many times you need to have a hierarchical system if there's an emergency, of course, on board. And then it's a very masculine coded environment also, where the man is the norm and certain behaviors are sort of promoted. And I showed you the other day I did this little exercise of Googling seafarer, both in Swedish and also in English. And that was not a very happy experience for me, I'd say. Because if we want to recruit the best new talent, young people, to a globalized, very interesting industry that has so much going on now, we don't want to send the message that seafarers, they are Popeye or beardy, burly men with pipes and a bottle of rum. And I mean, it's still...
Yeah, that is one of my soapboxes. We need to raise the profile of the shipping industry. Yeah. And of course, we should do something about the things that are wrong, but we are also, as you say, doing so many fascinating things, and we are so cutting edge on technique and things like that, and that we should share, which is one of my reasons for starting this podcast. But your research now, you have been funded by an insurance company to do some research on how we can be better at solving these things that the Me Too movement brought up.
So it's a very practical research project where I'm not really going to develop new methods or tools. I'm just going to identify them and collect them and also synthesize them and make them available for the shipping industry. For many years we had this, we are so special in the shipping industry. We need all tools, they must be tailor-made because we're so special. Of course we're special, but not that special. All industries are special in their own way. So my project is to identify strategies, methods, tools from large programs where industries or companies or organizations has rolled out an entire intervention to smaller tools or checklists, campaigns, smaller things to actually make a change, to work with diversity and also work with reducing the risk for bullying and harassment.
Yeah, because many companies do have a corporate social responsibility policy. They work with sustainability. They work towards the UN sustainability goals. But sometimes they forget about the social environment. Yeah,
that's, of course, I'm biased in this, but I'm happy to see the strong focus on sustainability now that we see in shipping. I'm proud of our industry that is working so hard to improve sustainability, and we are becoming more and more energy efficient. There are so many new technical developments and innovations going on, but it's still limping, I would say. It's a very strong focus on ecological sustainability. And I think we must also, at the same time, discuss the social sustainability perspective to work with the social parts. Because however you do it, there will still be people. Even if you talk about smart ships with perhaps not so many people on board, there will still be plenty of people around doing other things. So we must also make sure that we can work sustainable. So I'd say a sustainable shipping industry requires a sustainable working life.
And some women.
Yes.
More women.
Absolutely. For us to become sustainable, we need to work with trust. Trust is essential in business, in development of new technology in projects, and in developing the social sustainability. We need trust. And to build trust, we need to have structures to work with our health. It must be safe to work on board, but not only in terms of I'm not going to die at work. I mean, that is a nice baseline. but it's a bit low ambition, isn't it? I hope I survive today.
Yes, that's a very low ambition. But when I talk to ship owners, if I talk to the management people, they say, we don't have those problems on board our ships. And then I listen to the women who are actually talking about what it is to be working on board their ships. And I hear a different story. So who is responsible for the good environment at the end of the day?
Again, it's the employer who is responsible. It's no question about that. It's both it's regulated in the ISM code that the employer is responsible to identify and manage all risk, and so the employer is responsible. But then also on board, it's the captain and it's the officers in terms of that they are managers. But then the crew also. We all have a responsibility. For the individual person, it can be difficult to speak up on my own behalf. So I'd say it's very important for the rest of us to speak up as well, to not be a passive bystander. Many times when I see things that perhaps doesn't feel right in my stomach, I can choose to just ignore it, pretend that I didn't see, I didn't hear, I walk away. I choose to do nothing because it's not my problem. I'm not the one who is affected, or I'm not the boss. But it's important also that the rest of us stand up.
I know, because I've been bullied. And I was so disappointed in my peers who didn't do anything or didn't say anything. And I still am. And they feel embarrassed as soon as I meet them. They should, I think. So what happens to the people who are bullying other people? I mean, is there any repercussion? Or, depending on what kind of level, I would think. Because if it's sexual harassment, then there are some laws against that. And also if there is an abuse, of course, which we have heard about. But otherwise, it's just that you get fired.
We have a just culture. Just fire them. Yeah. I think in Sweden, we have had regulation in this area to work to prevent bullying since 1993 for 26 years. And I've not checked this personally, but I've heard that we were actually the first country to introduce legislation against this. Then it's been quite toothless. It hasn't really been effective, but still it's a clear signal that you are responsible to work about this. But I agree, during these 25 years in Sweden since we introduced the legislation, we have had one case that was taken all the way to court. While when we look at the statistics in this small country, we still have between 150 and 200 people each year that decide to commit suicide because they are bullied or in a workplace conflict at work. So this might actually be the most lethal work environment factor that we are dealing with. And it's not getting the attention it deserves.
I understand. I listened to you the other day when you were giving a lecture, and I understand that seafarers and miners are the most dangerous works when it comes to working environment.
If you that example was in terms of suicide. If you look at the suicide statistics from World Health Organization, seafarers are one of the most overrepresented professions when it comes to suicide statistics. So it is definitely an area to actually discuss. And I've seen reports from P&I clubs reporting that costs for mental ill health has increased over the years in the shipping industry. So we need to talk about this more. And I'm riding on the wave, if I can say that, on the Me Too wave, to be able to talk about this. I mean, they gave me funding to talk about this, to work with this. And it also gives me a voice and a platform to talk about this. And when the Me Too movement was very strongly focused on gender harassment or sexual harassment, I'm working on bullying or harassment for all to prevent that, of course, not only. And I know there are some men that are very concerned that working to improve the working conditions for women means that it will be worse for them. And for all those men out there who are worried about that, I'd say this is not a pie. Just because it's more for me doesn't mean it's less for you. This is a win-win for all. So if we can work with the mechanism that are there that causes sexual harassment, bullying at work, workplace conflicts, then we will also automatically reduce conflicts, bullying that are due to other factors as well, like age or ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, or whatnot. So this will be good for all. I think it's important to know that causes for bullying is not because people are idiots. I mean, let's face it, sometimes they are. There are lots of idiots out there. But that is not why we have conflicts and bullying. I mean, bullying is caused by shortcomings in the organization. When we don't know what you should do, what I should do, how should we do it, when are we supposed to be done, to what level of quality, if we have role conflicts, if we have a workplace culture which allows a lot of very, let us put it, uncivilized behavior, to put it mildly.
Or bad jokes.
Yeah, bad jokes, where we have normalized a lot of sick things. I mean, that is causing bullying and harassment and conflicts. And
an unsafe working environment.
Yes.
Because if you don't feel like you can do whatever you want, or if you feel that you are not allowed to speak up, maybe you won't speak up in a safety situation.
Absolutely. That is why I agree with you. This is definitely a safety issue. We need this psychological safety, that I feel that it's okay. I can be the person I am. That is okay. I don't have to pretend to be otherwise. And it's also safe to ask questions and speak up. I mean, that is what the entire maritime resource management is on about, to make sure that it started with the bridge team, to make sure that you allocate all resources you have when you operate a ship in a safe manner. And if you look at you've been in the insurance business for many years. If you look at the very strange accidents you see, maritime accidents, where the technology is working fine, but something has been going on. People have been afraid to ask after instructions or point out mistakes or.
Yeah, because I mean it's a hierarchy, and you don't talk against someone who is above you in the hierarchy. But sometimes you have to ask questions, and that's not the same as being obstructive or whatever. But some people can't really handle that. But how I was thinking about reporting, because we discussed that also another day. When you're reporting that something is not right on board, how does that work? Who do you report to, and who is receiving that information?
That varies across organizations, of course, but the basic thing is that every employer must have a system for reporting. So as an employee, you should feel safe that you know, where do I turn to if I have an issue? Where do I go? And also, what happens with that information? That is very important. Sometimes there has been people perceive that they've been harassed or victimized twice, because first they report something and then the information flows in a way that they weren't really prepared for, and actions were taken without their involvement, so they weren't really prepared.
And it comes back to hit you in the back.
Yes, yeah. Or like in some of our university that are regarded as official authorities in Sweden. If you would report something to through the official channels at the university, it might become an open, accessible file for everybody to see, according to our offentlighetsprincip.
Yeah, which is really sad.
Yeah, I mean that's not a trustworthy system. But if you don't feel that things will happen when you report it, if you suspect that I will not be believed, I will be questioned, this will just lead to my own career being sabotaged, then you won't report.
No.
So
what is the difference if I work not in shipping? I work for an ordinary company on land. So what is the difference here when it comes to legislation and so on? I would say that the conventions are international, and that is something that is agreed by each individual nation. But then you have the national laws for people who works in Sweden, for instance.
Yeah, we have the conventions from International Maritime Organization. They must be
ratified.
They must be ratified by the flag states. And also, I should remind us of that is the lowest level. I mean, it's not forbidden to have higher ambition than the legislation. I mean, that's the baseline, really. So there are differences in different flag states, of course. But in Sweden, as it is today, right, as we speak, we have parallel systems for Swedish seafarers working on Swedish ships and Swedish employees working for other companies. So if our big local ferry operator here in Göteborg, they have parallel systems for the seafarers and the people employed at the office and in the port, which I suspect in practice they don't have, because, I mean, who would want to have parallel systems? That would be extremely complicated. But the legislation is that now seafarers are not as well protected as workers ashore, which I think is very upsetting, actually, 2019.
So you have already started your research. When are you supposed to be finished with it?
So I will work actively for 2 years now, the entire 2019 and 2020, and then I will have the report. But this is not the ordinary research project where you just work for yourself, sit in solitary in your little office, and then 2 years after it surfaces a report that will be read by 1.7 people, including yourself.
That sounds a bit sad.
That's a stupid joke in academia, that research work is read by a very limited amount of people. But this is for the industry and with the industry. So during the time, we are working with workshops with the social partners and other actors within the shipping industry to get the input. I can provide what research says. I mean, I can be the one who read that report that nobody else has read. So, and synthesize, make it easily accessible, and also give you examples. This is how other industries have done to learn, and also what has been done within the shipping industry at an international level. So this I will prepare and give to the industry, and we can discuss it and see, can this be something for us? And for who? Of course, it's different if you is a big shipping company with lots of ships and lots of employers, and you have a lot of resources, or if you're a smaller company, or if you're going on ocean traffic, or if you're going one of the small island ferries here, the circumstances are different. So we try to tailor-made as much as possible. And also I have included a professional communicator in the project that can help me to make the information look neat and help me to spread the word, communicate it.
Good, really good. So what are the biggest differences that you have seen in shipping in general? I mean, you have also been around for a while. So what is the difference between now and then?
We talk about this. If we're going back to the diversity issue, I think the biggest difference now and before is that we actually talk about it. I mean, this is on the agenda. Just these past 2 days, I've received emails from colleagues who send me news flashes from around the world. Yesterday, it was 2 reports from the U.S. Coast Guard who has been working on recruiting and retention of female U.S. Coast Guard officers. Today, it was a newsletter from Denmark where they have started with some mentorship program for female seafarers. And so there is so much going on. Before, it was a general gender blindness, I would say, where we pretended that this is not a problem, this is not an issue. And if we don't recognize the problem, there's nothing we can do about it.
No, because we used to recruit from seafarers when we were recruiting someone on shore. It was sort of a prerequisite that you had to be a sailor before you came to shore. But that is different now, because now other things is also requested from the persons who are coming into our industry. And I see so many young women who are bringing in the new things that we need to know something about, like 3D printing or blockchain or autonomous ships and so on. And that is so interesting, because that also changes the industry. It's what they know, and it really doesn't matter what the gender is, but I can see that the young women are marching into the industry now, and that makes me happy.
And it's also because I think when we have seen it started coming, it's increasing, and they are in turn role models for the next generation. Yeah. We all need role models. When I started in this industry, all I could see was men, and a lot of white men, and they looked basically the same. And when I hear them speak, like in conferences, you can have an entire panel of men who looks exactly the same, with the same background. Where are the perspective? And that is sort of a more or less conscious bias also when we recruit people. We feel comfortable with this social proximity. When I can recognize myself in you, I feel safe. You look like me. You seem to have the same general frames of the view of the world. Good, we will get along well. And it's uncomfortable, a little scary to be forced to work with people who view the world in a different way.
So strong leadership is now required. It has been all the time, but leadership. So what is a good leader in your eyes?
The most important thing is to remember there is one size fits all, very rarely fits anybody particularly well. So you can't go and look for this silver bullet. Since the day of hunting vampires, we've been searching for this silver bullet. As peoples, we want simple solutions to complex problems. We cannot define this one best way of doing it. So we need leaders who are not afraid to have a situation-based or individual-based leadership, that I can sort of adapt my leadership style to the people that I'm managing, and also see their needs. Some people need a lot of management, perhaps to the level of micromanagement, while others would just suffocate if you try and get too many instructions. Or some people you have to restrain, or they will go overboard and perhaps work themselves to death. So you need also a very flexible leadership. But I would say one of the most important traits is you have to be a leader of change. Management of change, like it or not, the only thing we can be sure of is that change is coming.
It's happening now.
Yes, and it will continue. So if you're not a good change manager, or you're not secure in your leadership during times of change, you will have a lot of problems.
So courage is...
Yes, courage. And courage also to make the uncomfortable decisions.
And to be curious?
Yes, we like curious. Learning new things. And also not to be afraid of letting new talent and new knowledge come up. Even if I don't understand what this is good for today, maybe it will be useful tomorrow.
Did you ever have a role model growing up?
I guess I must have. I can't really. It's not to the point that I had some posters in my girls' room growing up. But of course I've had role models, and like my grandmother on my father's side, she's turning 100 this year. She's still alive and kicking, and she's been a very strong role model for women in the working life ever since I grew up, which perhaps I didn't think of it in those terms when I was smaller, but now I can really recognize the work she's done.
What did she do when she was working?
Nothing very much or complicated. The thing was that she was actually working and making sure that she could make her own career. And since she was growing up during the World War II and you weren't really able to travel, she took her bike and rode it to Trondheim and back, because that was the only way you could see the world. And so it's so nothing much, but just that she was demanding her rights. She's always hated cooking and so not the usual grandmother baking and cooking and knitting and stuff.
How could we become more visible as an industry?
By showcasing all the good things we do, and not only technology, also showcasing talent and showcase diversity, to show that we must change the pictures on Google. When you Google image seafarer, we cannot have it as it looks today. That we must change that. And also we must think of the material that we're communicating. This summer, the Swedish shipping industry is going on this tour to recruit more people, this shipping convoy. And it's been illustrated with a picture that was taken 40 years ago on a Swedish icebreaker. I like icebreaker. I have nothing against icebreakers. But if we want to recruit young teenagers to the industry, should we do that with old materials and a boat? A ship? Why not people? So we must show also how interesting the work is. A lot of material traditionally, when you want to recruit people, has been of a man in a uniform, looking on the bridge through a binocular.
Yeah. That picture I can picture in my head, because I've seen it so many times.
I would argue that standing on the bridge wing in uniform with a binocular is not most of the job that is actually done by officers on watch.
Mm. Who do you think I should interview the next? Who would you be interested in listening to in the Shipping Podcast?
That is not an easy question, thinking that you have already interviewed over 100 people. So who haven't you been interviewing?
I can continue until I turn 80, I think.
Oh, we hope you do.
Thank you, Cecilia, for taking the time to speak to me. And best of luck with your research. I hope I get the chance to come back and hear what you were finding out. Thank you, Cecilia, for sharing your knowledge with us. I think what you do is so important. I think all the listeners should make that little experiment and image Google the word seafarer and see what comes up. What you see is how people outside our industry look upon us. That is what we collectively is projecting to them. And I think we should join forces and try to change that image. Furthermore, I will put a link in the show notes of this episode to the video that was put together by the women in the group of Anchors Away, or in Swedish, Lätta Ankar, where they read statements from women who has been bullied or harassed in their workplace on board ships. Seeing is believing, but prepare yourself. It's not any bedtime stories. If you feel like discussing this or need help or support, I highly recommend the ISWAN Helpline, and we'll put a link in to that as well. Don't forget that I love feedback. Drop me a line at hello@shippingpodcast.com or give me a shout out in social media. My handle is @Lena Gosberg, wherever you are looking. I want to hear from you. And if there are anyone out there or any companies who want to support the work I'm doing, please let me know. I'm at hello@shippingpodcast.com, or you find me in Patreon. That is patreon.com/shippingpodcast. I think it's time that we start making some changes. So, from me to you, until the next time, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a Shipping Podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.